Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being with us today, and welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, home of the public programs of UCLA Film and Television Archive. My name is Shannon Kelly. I'm head of public programs for the Archive, where it's our great pleasure to be inaugurating this 3-month experience through Indian Eyes, Native American cinema, in which the Archive, for the first time in our 35-year history of programming, is taking a comprehensive look at the contributions of Native American filmmakers throughout the territories of the United States and Canada. And I also want to quickly say that in undertaking a work of this scope, we're also mindful that we're observing the work of and the cultural production of many nations around which the United States and Canada are privileged also to make a home. And we're especially pleased that in the context of doing this on our first outing of this ambition, we're doing so with the help and friendship of so many people of importance to this movement, some of which you will be seeing and interacting with today, these wonderful filmmakers who've given us their time and whose films are also going to be shown in the program. To introduce each of them individually, I'm going to leave to our moderator, but I would like to introduce Dr. David Delgado Shorter of UCLA's World Arts and Culture Department, who's also affiliated faculty with the American Indian Studies program of UCLA, and who's going to be helping guide us through a discussion of some rather large topics as we sort of map the terrain of the undertaking that we're beginning this weekend, and which will last through the middle of December. I want to mention that our film programming continues this evening with a double feature of 2 of the works that will be discussed here today, Shelley Niro's Kissed by Lightning and Randy Redroad's The Doughboy. And we'll continue tomorrow evening with a double feature of 2 wonderful interrelated works. The first, a documentary, Trudel by Heather Ray, and the second, a fiction feature, Tushka by Ian Skorodin. And it goes on, and if you haven't picked up a copy either of our calendar, which talks about all of the programming that we're doing in this period, because there's certain other programs going on as well, please do, feel free, but make sure also to pick up a copy of our catalog, which describes the programs of this series in depth. And I do look forward to many wonderful experiences together with you, and it all begins here. And now I'll give the floor to David.
Thank you, Shan. I want to first, of course, acknowledge and state our intentions to respect the land of the Tongva people and the indigenous people on whose land we are currently occupying. I'd like to start off by saying that, as well as holding in that same space gratitude to the series, to the UCLA's archive. Thank you so much for putting this series together and to bring such luminaries to the stage. If you don't know already, I figured it's appropriate to just do some brief introductions. Chris Eyre, this is amazing to be so close to him in some ways, because I've been teaching Indigenous filmmaking since '96. And when you choose to teach a course that surveys all of Native film and filmmaking, you have a lot to choose from, and to choose between skins and skinwalkers, and I mean, you have to do smoke signals. I have to just first of all say thank you so much, Chris, for coming today. Shelley, Niro, amazing. I can't believe I'm on the same stage as well. Photographer, painter, filmmaker. I think that her 1998 Honey Moccasin was sort of a game changer for teaching women making films, and I like her other films. I feel like she's doing a really great job of blurring the division between art as an object and art as process, and I think I'd like to talk about that a little bit later. And of course, we're going to be graced to see her film Kissed by Lightning in the series. Heather Ray, I mean, AFI, Gotham, Independent Spirit, Sundance, over 40 awards. No film, I think, got the sort of publicity that that film did for showing bordered issues. I worked with the Yaqui for the last 27 years on both sides of the US-Mexico border, and with Frozen River, I feel like to show women's issues, to show how women are caught up in cycles of violence, to show how it feels to be bordered by another nation state, no other film. I mean, it's just fantastic. Randy Redroad, I mean, shorts, documentaries, the director of Doughboy. It has its fingers on a pulse of a major issue, and in some ways, his examination of blood as a signifier of identity is, I mean, 14 years later, that's now commonplace in scholarly books to question that. And yet his film is raising consciousness on that issue through the filmic medium, which I think is perhaps the most important medium lately. And I'm not just saying that because I'm based in LA, but as an educator who's constantly trying to deal with teaching students about white guilt and colonialism, I have to tell you, film works. thank you for coming to join me in that conversation. Just briefly, I've worked with the Yaqui people of the U.S.-Mexico border area for 23 years. I made my first film last year, and I don't think I will ever do that again. It was just a short, but it taught me a bit about the industry. I've also have an industry consulting company that's been working with Hollywood agencies in making scripts better about representations of Native people and my secondary research area, the paranormal, which I'll let you sit with that for a bit. And I can tell you after 4 years of doing this, they always want to hear my opinions about the paranormal, but they really don't care about my opinions about Native representations. And when I put them in contact, if, for example, Disney wants to do a film that's about Kanaka or Hawaii sort of myths, and I say, great, let me put you in contact with someone that I know who's one of the fantastic Kanaka leaders there. Within a week later, I get an email saying we've decided not to work with them, it's just too difficult. I want to talk a little bit about that today as well. I started teaching college courses on Indigenous film in 1996, and because this panel is about surveying the landscape of Indigenous filmmaking and its history, I just want to take about 3 minutes to not name drop, but to bring some films and filmmakers to mind in order to enrich our sense of how we've come to here. And we're just gonna skip the first 70 or 80 years since Nanook and get to, as recent or late, depending on how old you are, the 80s, which brought us Powwow Highway and Broken Arrow. And you have to admit that just within the 10 years between the 70s, a lot had changed from Tell Them Willie Boy was here to start seeing films like Powwow Highway. And then with Victor Masayef's work, we started seeing Indians talk about the effect of watching themselves being portrayed by others. We had people like Arlene Bowman confronting the voyeurism in anthropology and essentially surrounding all issues of urban Indian identity. And while the themes of culture contact were still central, as we saw in Black Robe and Dances with Wolves, we also had a major shift in 1998 with Smoke Signals. This man here. A multitude of documentaries started helping us inside the college courses, whether it was Phil Lucas's look at boarding schools and internal colonization, or watching Charlene Teeter's face mascots head on in the 1997 film In Whose Honor. Which is crazy to think we're still dealing with the Redskins mascot issue, when a film, a small little film, covered the debate so well about the University of Illinois back in 1997. It's like another case like Randy Redroad's, of where someone who's making a film actually is ahead of the curve and raises the consciousness in society of an issue that they're facing in Indian country. Film was raising awareness quite early, and it was doing it from multiple tribal perspectives. Indigenous film was using animation to demonstrate mythology in Stories from the Seventh Fire and Barbara Wilkes' film Emergence. Indigenous film was making horror movies based on those tense myths, as in Sean Morris's Kusa Hakwan. HBO was at least talking with Native editors and writers, as they did for their series Grand Avenue. Native people were filming firsthand abuses to land and body in Chiapas, thanks to the Chiapas Media Project, and with the American Indian movement's use of cameras, which I was one of those people who would take cameras into AIM situations to film them for the archive. That's just the 90s. Right there, that's all the 90s alone. And I'm not mentioning all the ethnographic films, the museum-produced films, the art house films, other independent films. Heck, the 90s were so rich for Native films, we were able to get Johnny Depp to play a dead man without having to adopt him. After 2000, though, we had to deal with Apocalypto. Back to skins and feathers. Even south of the border, we like our Indians on the run. But we also, between 2000 and 2010, saw Big Eden, Kissed by Lightning, Doughboy, The Cave. I mean, filmmakers like Sterling Harjo, Shirley Chichu, Belcour, Pakawacha, I mean, I could go on here. Because this era, though, is so well represented by this panel and this larger film series, if you look through the catalog, I just want to stop and reflect on where we've come in the last 10 to 15 years. The UCLA Film and Television Archive has created a space for us to ask some very important questions about not only the changing film contents, but the changing landscape for making films about, for, and by Native people. And because this is a panel discussion, I'll start us off with some questions, but please know that because we're such an intimate group, all of your questions should definitely be just asked. Raise your hand and let us know. Shannon's got a mic. So I'm going to start this off with something I was reading this morning, completely unrelated. It was by a UCLA alumni, and she's the African-American director of The Secret Life of Bees, and she did Love and Basketball. You might know her, Gina Prince Bythewood. And she was asked to reflect on what it means that Hollywood would make 12 Years a Slave and the receptive audiences to Fruitvale Station all within the same year. And this is coming from an African-American director. I thought this was really interesting. They said to her, it's clearly a sign that making films about African-Americans is getting easier. And her response was really simple, not at all. It's as difficult as it was 15 years ago. She says, as soon as studios hear that your leads aren't white, the funding disappears. So I guess I want to talk about this, not so much about the race issue, but let's start with the intention of the panel, which is how does this compare or contrast to indigenous themed films, what she's describing? And do you think that in the last 5 to 10 years we've seen more or less granting agencies appear? Is it the same sort of funding cycles as you had to deal with maybe 10 years ago? In some ways, choose any point, like perhaps a project that you're currently working on or that you're about to work on, and tell us a little bit about what you see as the temperature right now for getting a film made these days. And I think I'll start with Shelley.
Well, I come from Canada, and I think the funding situation is a lot different than it is here in the US. For example, I finished a feature in 2010, and a lot of the funding came from telefilm. Not that we get the money. If you do get that money, you have to pay it back. But what it does, it allows doors to open to other funding agencies. And the budget we had was $750,000, and so, you know, it was like a low budget and not a substantial budget, but we managed to get something done with that. Most of my projects have been funded through arts councils and Canada councils, and a lot of people think because you're an Indian person applying to these grants that it's easier, and it's not easier. We have waves of racism going through the country, you know, and it's sort of reflected in editorials of newspapers where people will say, you know, they're just looking for the handouts, they're on welfare, what are they contributing to society, all that sort of thing. And so with that in mind, I find sometimes it's harder to approach funders or even producers saying, you know, I have this project, I'd like to see it worked out. But then again, because it's government funding and because Stephen Harper is not the friendliest person to arts organizations, you know, you're sort of on your knees a lot. Telefilm had a program 5 years ago called Featuring Aboriginal Stories Projects. And with that you could go through this process where you'd have a project, you develop your script, you could work with a story editor and get it to a point where it was producible. After 4 years, they said, no, we're not doing that anymore. And it's like, you know, of course, the Aboriginal film producers went, you know, you brought us along so far and then you just cut us off right here. What's the next step? Like, what are we going to do? And then they said, well, we have this other project, micro budgeting, and you can apply for $100,000. And it's like, I don't think that's going to cut it. But then I went to this telefilm budget meeting where they invited all the filmmakers to come, and telefilm is going to tell what they're doing with the money. And one of the things that they started off by saying is, this is what we want to see happen. We want to see successes in the theaters, which doesn't happen too much with Canadian films in Canada even. We want to see Oscar potential films produced. And the whole audience went, oh, like what? You know, so we were like, everybody just kind of, what? So that just kind of showed you what kind of political atmosphere you're involved with. And again, I just blame Stephen Harper. That's my personal opinion, that they were trying to, you know, appease him because he is the one who's kind of goes along and cuts, like he cut out the National Portrait Gallery just by saying, we're not going to do that, you know. And telefilm's always kind of in that position where they're afraid of being cut out too, which we don't want to happen. So it, you know, it just creates this sense of like, well, what are we going to do now? So
That's great, and it also helps us think a little bit about how changing political landscapes affect film funding and what viewers want to see and what they're ready to watch. If there's already something taking place nationally that has them at odds with what we would call a native perspective, then the funding's going to be more difficult.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Can we jump to the U.S. side and think about like major productions, Chris? And I mean, do you see the same thing?
I don't know. From my vantage point, it seems extremely difficult to find money for movies. I think it was easier, 10 years ago, on the heels of the explosion of independent film in the late 90s. There were still people showing up, after that. And I always likened it to, a house party where everybody came and at 6 a.m, there's empty cups and bottles in the yard and everybody still thinks it's happening. It's like, it's over. Don't you get it? It's over. They show up in the yard and they're like, yeah, but we're here. We've made it, You're like, it happened last night. It's over. So it just feels difficult just because of the tide, I think, of the time that we're in, which I think it'll come back around. So I mean, it's just, tides, and I think that kind of independent voice will come back around. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's a matter of, audiences aren't really, looking at that kind of stuff. And we fall squarely in, movies about something, which is too bad. We make movies about something. So it's kind of like, it's like people, aren't likening, I guess people aren't interested in political movies because sometimes they have issues or qualities about thinking and stuff. So, I think it just goes, with tides, they're tides. And so I think right now it's pretty difficult. But you guys have an opinion on that too, I don't know.
Well, I think for the last 2 decades, I've made a lot of different kinds of work. I've made 2 features and tons of shorts and documentaries, and it's always hard to get money. It's kind of differently hard every time. With Doughboy, Chris was my producer, and Smoke Signals was, blowing up, and I remember a piece of the money sort of seeming like, wow, this happened, that wasn't too strenuous. And then the second piece, I don't know if you remember Barry Weissler. We had money from this Broadway mogul who produced Annie, Get Your Gun. And then if you look back on it now, it was like me, Chris, and Barry Weissler in a room. It seems like an unholy alliance, just weird. And so he, at a certain point when he saw we were bringing him cast, the pool of native actors at that point was not gigantic. I don't think it is now either, but relative to other pools, but it's certainly bigger now. So we didn't have that large a roster of native talent to choose from, and he just wasn't having it, and he took off. He just split. He was like, I don't care if there's Indians in it. And he had a table read with a bunch of pretty renowned Broadway actors and actresses who just, Latina, he just wasn't on the train. So he split, and then luckily our first investor doubled her investment, and then the script won some money at Sundance, and then my director of photography invested, which is really weird and unheard of. But then I just made my second feature all these years later that Heather produced and co-directed with Russell Friedenberg, and there's no Indians in it, but there's a bunch of savages. And that money, both times it began with an unholy alliance, because Heather and Russ, we were like, wow, we've been, because you get a lot, you make 2 films or 4 films or 6 films, that means you had 24 that were really close and fell apart at a certain stage. So there's that piece of the story. But this money came because Heather and Russell just asked this wealthy man for like $150,000 because his wife wanted to be in a movie. We were that desperate to get something made. And we didn't have a script. We had this idea based on a weekend that we spent together. And we had a table read a few months later, and of course she can't act, and we had to leave that money. But in that interim, Russell wrote a script really fast, and we started getting, Amy Smart interested, and so it kind of became the second domino. And so it's a weird and difficult process. One had natives in it, one didn't. It's just always hard. Michael Hoffman, whose film The Best of Me is about to come out based on the Nick Sparks film, he said, he's a good friend of ours, he said, movies are hard to make. And I do believe, like, when you reduce all of the ways that they're hard to make, they're just hard to get to. They're kind of self-fulfilling prophecies, and the obstacles are myriad. Whether the content is political or whether it's not, they're pretty difficult to get going. So.
Yeah, I didn't want the conversation to be all about money today, or about the barriers in the industry. So I'm going to jump around a little, and I want to talk a little bit about content a bit. And Heather, I mean, this one is just so perfect for you in some ways, because I feel as a person who often decides, which 20 or 22 films I can fit into a semester or a quarter, there's moments where, almost like an anthropology text, I have to decide, is this film or book voyeuristic? Is it realistic, but not sort of making money off of the degraded Indian image? And I mean, you made, I would say, a very successful film that was showing some not too pretty sides of Native life. And it really, I think it combats audiences who are expecting mystical, I'm going to use a word I hate, spiritual, access to Indian identity in life. What is that struggle as a filmmaker to decide the content and the ramifications of it, or at least talk us what you went through with Frozen River?
Well, the first thing that I liked about Frozen River when I read the script, and I read the script because I met Melissa Leo, and she had done a short film with the director. And the first thing that I responded to was there was something very unapologetic about it. And I mean, the director is non-native, although she lives in upstate New York, and she has a number of friends and extended family, so to speak, because she's known these folks for a long time in those Mohawk communities in upstate New York. So Courtney had her own relationship to the people just by living in proximity and in community with the people. So, a lot of scripts that have been sent to me, whether native or non-native written, oftentimes can feel kind of like Indian 101, and I just can't stomach that. It's just so hard, because I just am craving to see contemporary images exemplified in the works that we're producing. And so the first thing that I really responded to was there was something very unapologetic about, like Little Wolf, which is Misty Upham plays that character, the Mohawk girl. And I just thought, well, this isn't something, it's not trying to explain anything, it's just a story, and it's about these two women that come together, around these border issues, which are very real, in those communities. I mean, the communities that straddle the border don't recognize the border. They're sovereign nations, and they have their own passports, and they don't recognize the U.S.-Canadian border. So the work of going back and forth across the frozen St. Lawrence River has been going on for a long, long time. So, it was just something that had a kind of matter-of-fact quality to it. And it was interesting because when Misty showed up, when we pulled the movie together, which was very difficult, everybody passed. Everybody in this town passed. Everyone. I mean, it was literally like, why are you doing this? This is really, there isn't, we just see no value in pursuing this in terms of, whatever you're endeavoring to do in your career and stuff. So when we did finally pull it together, which was through private equity, which is kind of how it gets done in the United States, is you seek out these high net worth individuals and you put up with them, whatever their deal is, and sometimes it's better or easier than others. But Misty showed up, and interestingly, she had cut off all of her hair. And the director came to me and she said, "Oh my God, Misty," because Misty had this long, beautiful, classic, long black hair, and she said, Misty has cut off all of her hair. And I was like, okay, all right. I mean, cool. I mean, that's who she is, and there's a lot of folks that have short hair, for whatever their reasons are. I mean, it could even be a kind of traditional thing where you've lost a loved one or whatever. So it sort of began this interesting conversation and process around which we were really discovering something which was about a world, that is right now, and that was dealing with border issues, or issues if you want to call it that, on a border that gets very little attention, because most of the attention is going to the southern border, which has its own politic to it. So I think that one of the reasons why the movie kind of caught, sort of caught fire in terms of audiences, and it was seen all over the world, and did well and all of that, is because, for one, it looked into a world that people had not seen, which I think is pretty important in movies these days. You really have to look into a world that you haven't seen. You just simply have to be telling an original story, because there's so many movies getting made. There's a saturation in the marketplace. The exhibition distribution ends are bottlenecking, and there's a plethora of content, and so you have to find a way to tell a story that is so totally original, and you go into a world that you haven't seen, or you go into a world that you have seen, but you're looking at it from a different perspective. And I think the Frozen River just looked at something, looked into a space people hadn't seen. I also think it dealt with the border in a way that had not been, people had not been talking about it in that way. And I don't think it's a perfect film, and it was surprising. I mean, everything that was happening with it, to be honest, was totally surprising to me when it was happening. Not that I didn't like the movie, I do like the movie, but even when it got into Sundance, I was like, wow, we got into the festival. And all the agencies that sell the movies when you go to Sundance, because, if you go to Sundance, you usually have some kind of a sales rep, whether it be one of the agencies like CAA or ICM, they all passed on representing the film after it got into Sundance. They just didn't see any value in it. They didn't see that it would actually do anything, even beside the fact that it got into Sundance. And so finally Cassian Elways, who I had known for a long time, who at that time was at William Morris, he said, we'll help you out. And so they took it on to sell it. And then it sold, like, after the first screening to Sony Picture Classics, so it sold to a studio. And we were like, wow, I still couldn't quite believe it had happened. And so suddenly the world was going like, oh my God, nobody thought that was going to happen, probably because there were no movie stars in it, and it dealt with a content that wasn't perceivably commercial. And then at the end of the Sundance, in the awards night, I still couldn't quite believe everything that was happening. And when they were announcing the Grand Jury Prize, which was Quentin Tarantino was the head of the jury that year, and when they were announcing the Grand Jury Prize, he was describing the film that was going to win the Grand Jury Prize, and I was like, oh wow, I think that's that movie Ballast. That's so cool, it's such a good movie. And I still could not believe that it was happening. And then the movie won the Grand Jury Prize. And then it went on to win about 25 Best Picture awards, and was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, and all this stuff had happened. And I'm telling you, each step of the way, I couldn't believe that it was happening. And that's on me too, because I'm so in the mindset that, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. Nobody really wants to see these stories, So I have my own ways in which I've internalized that. And for as great as all the Frozen River stuff was, and it was, it was cool. It's been 5 years now. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't mean that it's that much easier. I mean, I would say we're in a very anti-Indian sentiment right now in terms of the industry. That's my experience of it. And both Shelley and Chris were saying, there sort of are these waves we go through. But even a scripted television series that we've been developing and putting out there, and it's really also catching fire and a lot of interest. Now 2 companies, big high-profile companies, have said, we don't really think that you need the native storylines. We don't really think you need the native content, the native characters. It isn't necessary to the material. And I got one of those emails like day before yesterday, and I was up at Nike at this In7 event, and it was like, like, oh my God, seriously, I mean, it's part of what makes a story in this particular television series, this pilot, and this, this series so powerful, is it's looking at, a group of people that it's just a world you haven't seen, and it's incredible. Like, there's so much, it's endless what could be done going into exploring this world. And they're not even the leads. The lead's a white lady, it's like, and even still they were like, this is so great, but you don't really need the native storylines. So anyhow, I think that in all of this, the thing that I've been feeling lately is just, honestly, all of that, like, I have this thing inside of me that feels like I'm completely disinterested and waiting for anyone's permission. I honestly don't care about waiting for anyone's permission to do anything. And I think we have to give ourselves more power in what we're doing and just go do it. And however we figure it out, but we just give ourselves more power and we just go do it.
That's fantastic. And I think you really characterized well that feeling you have when a film does get made and it does well and it's fantastic. You sort of like, is this the next Dances with Wolves moment? Will there now be more funding coming through and people looking to fund Native-themed films or projects? And then it passes, and you don't know, it didn't really catch on that time. I thank you for ending that about integrity. In terms of integrity, I'd love to hear from each of you about viewer reception in the community that you're portraying, because I know that each of you, and whether it be Coeur d'Alene or Mohawk or just even your own community, let's talk about that. You've got to do it, you just got to do it, really, even without their permission, or how has that factored in, or just talk a little bit about the reception that you were surprised to receive by the people you were portraying. And Randy, you want to go?
Well, I'll just start at the beginning. When we were in Tahlequah, we were in pre-production down there, and I got word that Chad Smith, the chief at the time, Chad Smith wants to see you, and he read your script. I was like, oh, he hates me. He wants me out of here. I have to stop making. Like, it was really like harrowing, and then he liked it. And then he told me, he's like, can you change the flute to a fiddle? Because that's more Cherokee. And I was like, no, it's not. But it is, like, post the same way a Baptist church is, you know, like, yeah. But it was just, his approbation meant a lot to me, and generally just wonderful. I mean, at the time, I remember Kimberly Guerrero, who's a dear friend of all of ours. You know, she's from Idabel, which is pretty near where we shot, and she saw the film at the Egyptian, and she started bawling at the beginning because she saw her woods that she grew up in. So it was that level of, you know, wow, I exist. Now, I don't know if that still happens because there's a ubiquity of images of everybody on Earth now. So you know you exist if you have a cell phone, but it was a really kind of profound moment. Since then, I mean, I was after that I went to Canada. This is interesting. This sort of bears on the funding thing up there, and I'd been teaching filmmaking on reservations of California, and Jennifer Podemsky and Laura Milliken said, hey, why don't you come up and mentor these kids? We're doing a film in 4 days, and we want you to mentor them. I'm like, yeah, I'll whatever, it's cool. So I went up there, and they're like, well, we want you to direct it in 4 days. I'm like, okay, I should read the script. So I read the script, and I'm like, we should work on it. She's like, okay. They're like, oh, we want it to be a TV pilot. Like, she just kept leaking out a higher level of, like, burden. And so we made this film, and it's called Moccasin Flats, and it ended up being a TV series up there. They got their television series, but I couldn't direct the series because I was an American. So I've had a really strange, within an Indian context, I was kind of stiff-armed, and they really tried. They wrote really passionate letters and whatever. So that was an interesting. But always a good experience. What's really interesting about my recent work, we made a documentary about foster care that was on Showtime for 2 years, and that's just had a profound impact everywhere that it's played. And there are Native children in it who are taken into foster care, and there's a big, you know, sort of theme that way, but it's a sort of more universal, has a big impact on people. But among Ravens, there are no Indians in it, and we showed it in the Indian market in Santa Fe, and we were really curious, like, you know, Randy and Heather show up, and there's Amy Smart and blah blah blah, you know. So and the reception was pretty cool. I mean, it was like people went with it. So you have, like, behind the scenes, you know, Black Horse did a little bit of the editing, and Heather produced, and I co-directed and edited the film. And there's no Indian. There's not even. I mean, there's no Indians in it all, and there's the opposite of Indians, whatever that is. And everybody's really, like, into the story, and so here we are, and in the audience are, you know, Native. You know, portion of the audience was Native, and they just went with it and just asked questions about the movie, which I think is profound progress. You know, Chris kind of broke the seal with Smoke Signals in that original moment, and he was the first one. I want to give him credit. He made A Year in Mooring, which got renamed the way our film did, but he made a film with no Natives in it first. So he did two pretty historical first, I believe. So I know he's had that experience too, but I think to me that's, that I don't want to do that every time, but it was a profound moment, like that I think, I don't know if it's, I think that's a historical moment too.
And it doesn't have to be necessarily an Indian thing either. If someone recognizes themselves as being given voice inside a film, I think, Chris, you did Friday Night Lights. You've directed some Friday Night Lights. Do you have small town people in the South like, we don't play for football? It can happen anywhere. But the aspect of doing it in, was it filmed in Coeur d'Alene? Smoke Signals? Or outside of it?
Smoke Signals?
Yeah.
Yeah, quarterly.
So how did they film? What was the...
So I've had different experiences, I think like everybody, with communities that you're shooting close to, and Heather was there for Smoke Signals, so I think it all went fine with that community, because it was Sherman's, community, so I think it was fine. But I've had other situations. One of the biggest compliments is shooting the movie Skins in Pine Ridge, and just having people at Walmart stop you and thank you for the movie. That's when you know it's real grassroots. When you got Indian families at Walmart stopping you with all their kids and saying, "Hey, I love Skins." So, that was a great experience. Edge of America, it's kind of a double-edged, thing sometimes, because, communities can be political. And Edge of America was a Showtime movie, basketball movie, and we went to Shiprock to shoot it, and the school board had read the script and somebody flagged there was profanity in it. And that turned into a comment that it was derogatory towards Native people, which turned into a comment that it was derogatory towards Indian women. And so I was supposed to go to a meeting at the school board, and my producer was there in New Mexico, and he said, "I'll go," because I had to fly home for the weekend. And I thought to myself, maybe he shouldn't go, because he's a white guy, But Steve said, "No, I'll go." I said, "Okay." He called me that night. I said, "What happened?" He goes, "They shut us down. We're not going to be able to shoot the movie here in Shiprock." I said, "Maybe I should have went to that meeting."
But that's the Southwest. If you don't
Right.
piss off a tribal council, you actually haven't done a good job.
So we actually took the movie to Salt Lake City, and there was news, local news, that they were going to protest us and all that stuff, and it just got out of hand where it's like, I don't think we could have done anything about it. It was gossip, and so it got out of hand, and I just thought it was really funny that people were making signs and going to protest us when we were out of town, actually. So I always thought it'd be great. They're holding signs up. So, but we were Hollywood. We were Hollywood. I was like, really? Okay. So it goes both ways, I think, And, we're hypersensitive, and political, and all this stuff. And so, you got to look at both sides, and it's always, look at the mascot issue. Is everybody excited about the issue?
Redskin?
Yeah, the Redskin issue.
I'm not supposed to say the R word.
Yeah. So it's just always this stuff, It's like what happened to Codename Geronimo?
Oh, right, that's right.
What happened to that? It's like, so as a filmmaker, we always have all these, touchstones, and just because it's native doesn't always make it right. It's a double-edged kind of thing, and I think we have to be objective at certain points too. Which is we're artists. We're artists. And, we do touch things and provoke things, even with our own, people, which are good as artists, So you got to look at all of it kind of and, determine on your own as an artist what you're doing.
Yeah, let's jump up north. Is that the same case for you? I sort of feel like when I watch your films, you're showing so much character development and intimacy within people's lives. Do you get people responding to that that's not how they live, or?
When I'm writing a script or developing my ideas, I really try to, I think about the audience in the beginning, but then as I get through to the end of the script, I'm no longer as investing in that audience as much as I'm investing in myself. And I really see myself as like this 9-year-old kid thinking, what would I really like to see, So then it becomes really personal. Having said that, I really try to be make it as entertaining as possible, because I know that people from my community are going to be seeing this, and I want them to be entertained, and I want them to love what they're looking at. And you know, it really comes down to that. I also try to include as many people from my community into the actual filmmaking of it. So sometimes they're on the screen, sometimes they're, you know, shoveling the snow and in the background, that sort of thing. But it's trying to be as inclusive as possible. And because I'm so much aware that, you know, film is sort of a new thing that's come into our lives, like in the last 20 years. And it's something that I want little girls and little boys to say, I can do that too, and not, you know, feel like they, you know, they can't even figure out what a camera looks like. So I think that's really important. So it takes in all these other layers that, you know, that sometimes I kind of forget about as I'm going through the whole process. So it's really about trying to include everybody. In Honey Moccasin, there was a bar scene, and tried to get as many elders in that bar as possible, you know, so we see them all just sort of sitting there, you know, and a lot of them have passed away. And so to me it's just important to archive their faces, because film to me was like, here we get to see all these people like John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, and they're like up on the big screen all the time, but where are we? You know, if you're looking at Westerns, you know, we're the guys on the horses, but not necessarily are we archiving the people that are actual living presences within our own living experience.
Especially when you bring in kids. I mean, particularly with Kiss with Lightning, you have the boy with the dog, and I thought, what a perfect. Well, I thought what a great looking res dog, and then I thought, like, that you're bringing a younger generation to look for. I mean, younger than even Smoke Signals, and you have this kid. The film forces you to think about the continuing, the enduring community, not just simply the ones that are passing away. And so the Indian stops becoming this thing that's a shadow of a great existence, but actually someone who's going to be engaging the future.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
You want to contribute to that too?
I just have a couple of anecdotal things. I do want to say just how much I loved Honey Moccasin. That movie really had an impact on me. So as part of the audience, you know, it was a film that there was a couple of movies during those times that really opened things up for me. Honey Moccasin being one, and Shimon Alexi's film that he directed, The Business of Fancy Dancing, as well. But I have a story from Smoke Signals. I did all the extras casting on Smoke Signals. It was actually the very first movie that I ever worked on. Thank you, Chris. And at some point in time, the producers decided that I was going to be kind of like the tribal liaison and sort of be the conduit between the production and the tribe. We were shooting at Coeur d'Alene, and we also shot at Spokane. And so at one point when we were shooting on the Coeur d'Alene res, one of the main gals from the tribe called me up and wanted to have a meeting with me. And do you know this story?
No, but it sounds like you protected us.
Well, what happened was Coca-Cola, back in the day when there was actually product placement, Coca-Cola contributed some funds to the production, and, you know, cases upon cases, probably a couple of truckloads of Coca-Cola. So in all of the craft service and in the scenes with, you know, the Coca-Cola, you remember the big dinner scene with the table with Coke cans all along and whatnot. So anyhow, you know, one of the gals from the tribe called me up and said, we'd like to have a meeting with you. And I was like, oh my God, what could it possibly be? So I went down there to meet with them at the tribal offices, and there was all these ladies there and me, and I was sitting there thinking, I have no idea what this is going to be about, but I'm here to, you know, to make sure everything is taken care of and addressed. And so the woman who was sort of my main contact with the tribe said, we just want you to know that this is a Pepsi res. This is not a Coca-Cola res. And this is Pepsi res. And I was like, okay, totally got it. Like, all right. And I sort of tried to explain, like, well, Coke was a sponsor, so they gave us all this Coke, and we have to use it. And it's like, you know, but I said, listen, no problem. I'm going to make sure that the production gets Pepsi for craft service, you know, and we're going to take care of this issue. But it was very funny because Coca-Cola and Pepsi, you know, divide up the country into their territories, and Idaho is a Pepsi territory, and that was a Pepsi Res. And there's one other story that I would share just briefly, and that, you know, speaks to the question. When Randy and I were in Oklahoma to show that Showtime documentary that we did about foster care, it was a conference on Indian child welfare or whatever it was. And so we were there, you know, participating in this conference on Indian child welfare, and we showed the documentary, which is called First Circle. And when we were done with our presentation, I walked out, you know, to go into the foyer of the building where we were presenting, you know, the auditorium. And there was a line of people, this always makes me emotional, and that I guess had come from various parts of the state, you know, Native folks from, you know, Oklahoma, which was obviously there's a lot of folks there. And they were all there with their copies of Trudell, the documentary that we did about John Trudell. All there with their copies of Trudell for me to sign. And I think it just was a moment when it just impacted me that we worked very hard in that movie, and I worked on it for 13 years, and it was just far too long, and did my damnedest to get it done and get it out there. But it did come out a long time ago, you know, but it was a film, I think, that it was a moment for me when I was really kind of got the impact of that movie has been seen far and wide within Indian country, like Smoke Signals and Doughboys, and, you know, and films that come from Canada like Shelley's movies, but it was a documentary, you know, that people had really, you know, have seen. It went viral, and it's, you know, there's tons of places where it's for free on YouTube, and, you know, all of that. And it just, I mean, when I walked out of that auditorium and those folks were all there, I just started sobbing, because it just, you know, it just hit me like, oh my God, we did something that actually, you know, I don't even know if I know really that it really did have an impact, you know, so.
Can I just follow up on that really quickly? How long was Trudell? Was it, how many, 50? Or how many minutes was it?
Well, there's an ITVS version that is 50 minutes or 55
And did you
minutes.
just say
but there's a
13 years?
Yeah, it's a feature-length film. I mean, it was theatrical. It played in theaters and whatnot in about 65 territories, and played tons of festivals. And that version is 80 minutes, I think, or whatever, 80-some minutes, I forget. But there is also a PBS version. So I worked on it for 13 years.
13 years for that one film.
I did not intend to work on it for 13 years. I'm embarrassed to say that I worked on it for 13 years, but it just took a long time.
If you haven't seen it, it's probably one of my favorite documentaries of all time. I mean, it's a sort of statement to his character. I brought him out to Indiana University when I was there, and he did the film presentation and the Q&A. And to this day, I don't think nothing has, as a documentary, in terms of a documentary form, I mean, Trudell is fantastic.
Wow, thank you very much.
13 years, wow, I didn't know that. I have so many questions in the pocket that I can keep going on, but we do have this opportunity to ask questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Well, I guess I'd like to ask everybody, what were the stories you most hoped to tell and didn't get to tell?
What a great question. For the first one, I'll just restate it. It's what are the stories that you haven't had a chance to tell? Do you want to add on? Is there some sort of, do you want to add on to that? Or?
No.
Yeah. Did you come across a story? Did you come across a screenplay? Did you come across something in your own life that you think this would be fantastic and it didn't work out? It didn't get the funding, it didn't go all the way. You mentioned how there's 24 projects to every one that does get made.
I would add, and is there another shot at any of it?
Yeah,
Is
how do
there
you-
another round at any of it?
How do you imagine resurrecting it?
For me, I've written a lot of material over the last however many years, and some with my writing partner, and a lot on my own. And of that 10 or 15, you know, of those screenplays, there are just some that are so from your heart. They're all from your heart. Some of them are a little more, you know, when you're trying to crack into the industry. I think it's really profound. What Heather said about Trudell bears on this question, because that's really what art is. The relationship with art and money is, I mean, that's so valuable. And you know, it's funny because the ultimate impact of hopefully these stories are moments like that where you realize, wow, this has meant something to people for, you know, the theatrical or commercial sort of lifespan of a film is really short. Even Titanic, I mean, that's just a pittance of the lifespan of this work. It could be music or literature or whatever it is. So it's strange. So the ones that like you just, I don't know. After the experience of this last one, I really want to get back to my roots and tell. There's the stories that have to come out of me. It's not that they aren't all your children and they all mean something to you, but there are those that, you know, my wife is, you know, due with our son today, which actually happens to
Rough the audience already.
you know, so there's something like it's my first child, and there's just something like I just don't have time to fuck around anymore. Like I just want to. There's something that's so like your heart's so open, and you really, you know, I never lost it, but I'm even more fortified to just tell those kinds of stories that have to come out of you. So there are probably half a dozen. One of mine called Tearjerker. One that I'm going to make next is called The Last Typewriter, and it's about a typewriter repairman who sort of becomes renowned for his ability to concentrate, but you know, in the digital sort of ADD Silver Lake culture, and you realize at the end of the story that he's just as disconnected as everyone because of an emotional wound, and it's a small, you know, like I'm like. I can't wait to make it for $100,000, and that's commercial death. But that's not the motive, and it never really was for me. Like the times I've tried, it's really important to get your investors' money back, and that's a very serious responsibility. But it's hard to do, and it's like trying to find a way to hustle your dinner and keep your storytelling really pure has always been important to me. And there are times, I think, looking back, I'm proud of my body of work in that regard. And now I really, really want to do that more and more. So that's a great question.
And I bet a lot of people, I mean, I think even for me, before I moved to LA, I would have thought this way. You'd think, oh, Chris, you can make anything you want now. I mean, once you do something, it changes everything. You can probably
That's what
just
I
tell
thought.
them what you're going to be doing next. And they say, great, well, how much?
Yeah. I haven't made a movie in, 4 years?
Not bad.
Sucks. But, you know, there's those movies that you want to make, and the one that got away from me was a movie called A Whale Hunt that I had at HBO, and we actually were prepping the movie. I was on location in Washington State doing some casting, and literally there was a phone call from the executive, and she said, I have some bad news. I said, what? She said, we're not making it this quarter. And so you're thinking to yourself, naively in your Motel 6, you're saying, does that mean in 3 months I should call back? You know? Not this quarter. What does that mean? Yeah. So what happened was then I went home. I flew home, which is really takes the wind out of you when you're prepping a movie and all of a sudden it's like, I'm on a flight back home. Not going to make the movie. And about a week later in the trades, there was an announcement that HBO was making Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And that's what happened. Because you can't have two Indian movies at the same time, you know. And I thought to myself, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee? I'm like, they acted like it was the Bible or something, you know? The D. Brown book. I'm like, you know, it's like, you know, how bad is bad? It was bad. That's what, you know. So like, you know, so they wanted to make that, you know. So they did make Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and blessings to all that stuff. But, you know, Whale Hunt got axed, I think, over that. And A Whale Hunt is a really amazing movie because it's a true story about the Macaw Indians who in 1999 took a gray whale traditionally for the first time in almost 100 years. And the reason they did that is because the gray whale came off the endangered species list in 1995, and they decided that they were going to hunt a gray whale in the traditional way, and it was really a cultural renaissance. It was amazing. I mean, you can get on YouTube and see the footage of the actual, you know, taking of this whale in the Puget Sound, and everybody lost their minds, you know? all the liberals in the Northwest, they're taking a gray away, the animals have feelings, you know. It was like, they lost it, and little do people know that, I mean, the Inupiaq take 22 whale a year up in Alaska, and all these other tribes take, you know, a lot more whales. So the movie was really about sovereignty. It was about, you know, the Makah have the right to whale forever in their treaty with the US government, and that's what the movie was about, really. It was about, you know what, it really doesn't matter, you know, what we think as you know, layman, you know, Americans. This is about, you know, if this tribe wants to do this, this is their right. And, you know, she gave herself so the people could live. You know, that's the belief. And so that was the one that got away, and hopefully you'll be able to do it. I'll be able to do it sometime.
Well, Chris, it's a perfect one to do the follow-up. As a filmmaker, as a person who has this vision, who has all these contacts, and you already know the story, and you already got it laid out in your head, for people out there who make films, what do you do now? Do you keep going every year back to the same producers? You keep trying to find funding?
I have it with some people right now, or as Heather would say, folks. I have some folks right now that I'm you know, crossing my fingers with. You know, it's like, you know, gambling. You just keep pulling the slot, and you're like, I hope this hits. You know,
appropriate.
And so I have it out to some people right now that I'm hopeful that something will happen with it.
Awesome. Shelley, you want to take that one? Do you have some pieces that didn't get made and they were so close and you were...
Well, right now I'm working on a script that's finished called The Incredible 25th Year of Mitzi Bearclaw, and it takes place in Northern Ontario, and I wanted to make a film that focused on young people in those areas, because in Canada, and I think it's much like the US as well, there's such a high phenomenon of suicide amongst young people, and you know, the violence on the reserve, but it's not concentrating on that. I'm trying to make it into a situation where it kind of opens up those doors for other people to go and see that, you know, instead of closing up the newspaper saying, I don't want to know anything about that, I'm just hoping that it opens it up. So I'm so OCD about this project, it's crazy, you know. I just think, I feel like my dog, and I know there's a boiled wiener in the fridge. It's like, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. So, and that's all I think about. And until it gets done, you know, I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heather,
Boiled
you've
wiener.
had so many different types of projects in the last
I know.
10 years. Like, it seems like almost kind of like Chris, don't you get to make everything? You don't get to make everything, obviously, but
I
like,
know.
is there one that...
Well, you know, what's interesting is that one of the things I'm really interested in is actually making a movie and getting paid.
That's so odd.
Yeah, I know. I know it's a lot to ask.
Did you say that?
I said it. I have deferred my full fee on the last 6 movies that I've produced, and because of the collapsing budgets and the shifting economy in the industry, you know, just changing, the tides of change, and so that's something that I'm really interested in. And if that means the film is native and non-native, it isn't as much of a concern to me, because I really do feel like that there's a kind of indentured servitude that it's been wearing me down. It's affected my health and my well-being, and so that's something I'm interested in. Is actually kind of a kind of sustainability that just giving myself more power in that sense. I'm going to produce Randy's movie Tearjerker, which is a beautiful, poetic, lyrical film about an obese, porn-addicted trucker.
Doesn't that sound like a bunch of money?
I would watch that.
That's a winner. Totally commercial.
I don't think you need the trucker.
Exactly. I know. Exactly. We've heard those stories. And then something else. I mean, a story that I really, really want to tell, and I'm going to possibly figure out how to write to do this. Is I was lost in the woods for almost 2 weeks when I was 12 years old, on my horse, and survived. You know, it was an extraordinary journey. In a lot of ways, it was like a rite of passage for me. I mean, I came out of that experience really being afraid of very little, and you know, dealt with bears and rattlesnakes and all kinds of things, and it was really extraordinary, because I really did after that experience have the sense that there was very little that I was afraid of, because I'd sort of already. And I remember I moved to New York when I was a teen, and somebody one day said, "Oh my God, you're from Central Idaho. I mean, how is it being in New York?" And I looked at him and I was like, "New York? Like, you know, I looked a bear in the eye many times actually. So it wasn't like I just didn't. I had the sense of like it isn't even." So there's something in that story that I feel like, you know, for young people, for young women, to have stories that give them a sense of what's possible and to give them a sense of courage, young people in general, and even Native folks like myself who didn't grow up like traditional, and you know, but that, you know, I grew up with Native culture and tradition and spirituality being the through line. I mean, I don't know anything about Christianity or any other kinds of religions really, but there were certain things, and I'm sure in a more traditional sense, like some kind of a, you know, something when I turned 13 that would have, you know, been like a kind of rite of passage. I mean, I didn't have that experience. So that for me was that. And I think a lot of young women these days, from whatever their cultural backgrounds are, don't get to have those experiences of those rites of passage, and young men as well. Sometimes it's through sports, sometimes it's through other means, but I feel like the movie could be that. And then the other thing that I'm starting to explore is working with storytelling through the single image, and so I'm kind of pushing a little bit further into my own, into photography, which is something I've been doing for a long time. And part of my focus for the next 2 years is to do large format photography, like, you know, big negatives that can blow up big, and document Native people in a contemporary sense. And I'm starting with the folks upon whose land we are standing and living, the Tongva and the communities that are right around here. And I just really want to I want to have, you know, images of the people now.
Fantastic. It's such a fertile question. Thank you so much for posing that.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for all these wonderful stories. I'm like so proud that everyone's here. My 1/8 Native is having a blast now. So go Tainos. I'm from Puerto Rico, so and I'm 1/8 Taino. Anyway, I would love to know if anyone here has actually approached the tribes in Southern California, who have so much money, like the Morongo. I have friends of the Morongo tribe that have a lot of money by birth. What has been your experience approaching tribes, if you've done so?
And not even Southern California. It's such a great question to ask. Historically, we see now self-supporting, I mean, in Minnesota they've had self-supporting tribes for a while, but now that you have self-supporting tribes, how has that changed the funding game? Because, like, again, there's this whole, like, white knee-jerk reaction, well, they're so wealthy now. And some of them are. So how has that changed things for you? Does it just increase the amount of people you can go to?
I've had horrible experience with trying to find money with tribes. I've never had any tribal money to do anything I've ever done, and I've approached tribes numerous times because it's a classical, you know, comment, which is, you know, go to these casino tribes and get money. So I've pitched to them a few times, but you know, when you really look at it, I mean, my tribe has a casino called Lucky Star, which is not a very wealthy enterprise, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, where's my $40 per cap that I get, you know? And I'm like, I'd be kind of pissed off if, you know, oh, we gave it to some filmmaker to make a movie, and it's not about our tribe, it's about another tribe. It's about, you know, the Cherokees. No, I'm just being it's about, you know, it's about another tribe. And you're like, there's this idea that, you know, all these tribal members should be morally responsible for telling stories about all other Indians at the expense of their own income, you know? And, you know, people can't understand why tribal members wouldn't say, here's my money to make a movie about Geronimo, you know? Right. Well, I'm not Apache, but here's my money, you know? And so I haven't had any success with tribes. You know, I even look at the commercials and I think to myself, in you know, the best case world, I mean, I think Native filmmakers should be, you know, providing that content for advertising. And that isn't the case either. So, you know, I mean, with tribal money, I mean, it's relatively, at least the successful tribes, it's new money. You know, it's new money, and people are also, experiencing that for the first time, which is, 20 years ago is when it exploded. And I think it's new money, and people are learning, what to do with it. But I know there are some people that have had success with tribal, money.
Ricky Schroeder.
Yeah, Ricky Schroeder.
But
The
isn't-
movies weren't successful, and that's what's hanging, is that there's been a couple of films that tribes have invested in that were, fiscal failures, and there was no return, so that's what's sort of hanging.
Which is what independent films usually do, wasn't an anomaly that they didn't make money. I have an interesting, I've never gone to a casino, I've never gone for that money, but we just, about 7 weeks ago, Kimberly and Johnny Guerrero and myself went up to Coeur d'Alene, who have a really successful casino, and we made a video for their Unity conference, and I shot 95% of it on the iPhone 5, and I think we're almost at 25,000 views on YouTube, and it's like blowing up, and it's just kind of went viral.
What's it called again? Say it again.
We Shall Remain.
Okay.
And then the conference, Heather just came back. It was part of our collective that we invented out of that experience. So now it seems like that door is kind of open, but I'm not interested in telling a story about. I'm just gonna say it, I'm not all that interested in telling a story up on Coeur d'Alene about them, just to make a movie, because again, there's those stories I really want to tell. So it's all, like I said before, it's just always an equation that's, you've just got to decide what you have to balance. I need to make money with, I got to tell this story, and there's just so many things. So, but it looks like that money, there's probably going to be some funding for some more projects, and I know that our partner up there, Lavina Louie, really wants to make a feature about her tribe up there, and so that would be more kind of. It seems like a no-brainer now that she has a successful video and a team of filmmakers, and the casino has a lot of money and it's about their tribe, and then they're all going to argue over it internally, and it'll take 5 years to happen. But so I've sort of stumbled into that. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about that. And obviously it's not my tribe, but I'm going to intervene as a part of a village, universal village that we are. Because I just feel like your argument could be that if you really want to tell the stories of Native Americans, collectively, whether you're Cherokee, Taino, or whatever other tribe you are, you have to stick together and maybe do a fund to be able to make the people like you who are actually doing so well, to be able to put out the stories. Otherwise, I don't see the white man doing it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I think I think the difficulty, and I would say that in the academic world, I might not be incredibly popular with a lot of academics, because I have a problem thinking that there's something called indigenous theory or method, because I know that there's Navajo method in theory, and there's Yaqui method in theory, and there's Hopi method in theory. It's almost like this introduction to Native studies where people are like, what's an owl mean? And I'm like, sometimes it's the dead, sometimes you eat it, sometimes it's funny. There's so many different responses, and I think that if you're a tribe who's coming into new money, as Chris is saying, there's probably a laundry list like education and diabetes, and then filmmaking probably isn't on it at all. And if it is, it's probably for a politician to get reelected. So you're right, there should be a panel, but probably not one to make the films as much as to maybe pool the resources. Yeah.
And also the arts in general. So it could be arts, photography, it could be, theater, which is another way to tell the stories, which is so wonderful. All I'm saying is that maybe you need to educate the tribes. And whether you're gonna get into a fight over it, or a big discussion, or with a woman, but it's something that's gonna take years, but we need to start now. It's like I feel the same in the Latino indigenous community. It's like we're always complaining, but it's like there has to be a complaint and doing tomorrow.
Yeah.
You don't get up, and do something, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, that's what I meant. They up on Coeur d'Alene, they witnessed something that was about their community, about a serious issue, and then they saw the power of film and the power of the response from
Did they
their
come
young
to you?
people.
They came to you, right?
Yeah, I taught music up there to their kids 9 years ago, and with our friend Star, and So I went up this time to do a music video with some friends, Kimberly and Johnny, and so they've seen it just checked all the boxes to this point. It's about something they care about. It reached their youth. It was a film. They funded it. It was about. It's a really right moment for them. Yeah, to embrace. And also, it's not. Everybody has a camera. Everybody has a phone. It's not like filmmaking is an exotic, animal like it used to be, like everywhere. Like they're hip to the technology. So
There's a woman in the audience, Dr. Aparna Sharma, who's an amazing filmmaker herself, so I'm going to let her go next.
Thanks, David, for that introduction. I had a question. I wanted to know a little bit more about the avenues of training you had as filmmakers. How did you get trained in filmmaking? And what are the avenues available to aspiring filmmakers in your communities? And do you feel there's been a shift in that between your generation and the younger generation now?
Yeah, Aparna, thank you. I'm going to use this opportunity to just put a little twist on it. What is the effect of having something like Sundance be such a shaper, if not the shaper, of the next generation? Speak to your own experiences, even in the Canadian context. That's actually a really great question. How did you even learn when I think about some of your earlier films? So let's start with the women this time and go this way.
Did you just walk out of the bush?
I know, you're just so
Yes,
freaking
that's what I
good
did.
right at the beginning.
Well, I'm an artist, and I love film, and I made my first film in 91 or 92. And it's just a matter of, like, for me it was having this other person who was a co-director and co-writer and everything, and it's like learning where to get the camera and, knowing how to hire a sound person, all that sort of thing, and you end up learning how to put the elements together. And using my art training, it's like building a sculpture. So you have to, make your base, you have to make the shape, you have to understand where you want to go with the film and what it's going to serve, what purpose it's serving. And, I didn't go to film school, but it's kind of learning on the run. And sometimes it's really exciting. And I just find every time I make a film, it's like, wow, I learned so much in that film. It's incredible.
I can't even believe you figured out editing in 91, like even just sitting there. I mean, it's so well done.
I know. Editors are like
Editors.
They have
We could do a whole thing on
the
that.
vocation of being an editor. There's editors who will do exactly what you tell them to, and then there's editors who will come to work the next morning all sweaty and I was thinking about this scene, and they're the best ones. They're crazy. They just think about it. They eat, drink, live it, sleep.
And Aparna's second part. So from your perspective, this would be really interesting to learn. Canada. The youth, are there more programs for Indigenous youth to learn filmmaking right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of workshops happening in different art centers. A lot of people are going to film school. There's just an incredible amount of talent coming out of those schools and centers.
Is it centralized in a bit like the way, and maybe I mischaracterized it, but the way I think of Sundance, is there a Sundance of Canada or something like that, or CBC funding? Or?
There's organizations like that. Because I do live in a bush-like situation, I don't really have access to those kinds of centers. But yeah, they are there.
Heather?
I did go to film school. I went to Evergreen, and I graduated in it with a degree in cinema and multicultural studies. And it was a non-traditional kind of approach to filmmaking. And I actually started taking photographs when I was about 14 years old. I did not grow up watching movies and, a lot of the classic stories of working in a video store and seeing, thousands of films. I actually grew up in central Idaho, and for many years we didn't even have electricity or running water. So I didn't have television. So I didn't start really looking at things until I, left home and went out into the world. But there was something about the single image and the idea. I mean, the world for me was very visual. And when I did go to college, I was studying writing, creative writing, and poetry, and cultural anthropology. And it just kept, it all was sort of swirling in my head. And then there was a program at Evergreen called Visual Ethnography, which took me into the world of, really what the ethnographer does with a camera in their hand. And so I started, my roots were in documentary filmmaking, and the very first film that I made, which would have been in 1987 or 88, that's a long time ago. Randy and I are 48. He's 48 today. Today's his birthday.
Happy birthday
Day to you.
Do that
And
at the end.
I turned 48 last Wednesday. So anyhow, yeah, my first film was about giving birth to my first son at home, and then from there I went on to to do a lot of experimental work, and then came to Los Angeles in 1990 and started working for a production company, and I learned a lot in film school about thinking and talking about film, and I watched a lot of film, and it taught me how to watch movies and create a language for myself. But it was when I started working with filmmakers like Phil Lucas, and even Sandy Osawa, people that native filmmakers that really had made an impact on me in terms of how I approached making film from a native perspective. And then I was brought on by Sundance to build the Native program, the Native American program, which now Bird Running Water runs. And during my years at Sundance, Michelle Satter, who runs the feature film program, and Jeff Gilmore, who then ran the festival, and a number of people that were working for Sundance as advisors, all became part of the ways in which I learned to think about, talk about, and make cinema. So I think that because it's an art form and it's alive and vital and it's evolving, and that we have to stay with the times and be constantly having these kinds of conversations and exploring and learning. But there were people who had a tremendous influence on me. Marita Mita, who's a Maori filmmaker who has passed on, but Marita Mita was one of my mentors as well, and had a profound impact on helping me to create a cinematic language for myself. And I think just seeing movies, but also just staying open to the world through all the various ways in which we experience the world. Like, I even read the news because it keeps me connected to something in the people, So I think that I do consider myself a storyteller first and foremost. I'm obviously not making any money, so I do think of myself as a storyteller, and I think of it as a contemporary expression, filmmaking as a contemporary expression of a very archaic form. Like you were saying, Shelley, it's only really been, 20 years that as a community, as we know ourselves now, we've been doing this. So that's kind of my journey. I think Sundance is important, and also Berlin just started a program called Native. I just finished working for the last 2 years with the Sami in northern Norway, the Sami Film Institute. It's all over the planet. There's 500 million indigenous people on the planet, and everybody's talking now, which is great.
I know you work with kids. I mean, you've said it already today. So you actually have a concern about teaching this craft to others, or?
Yeah, I didn't go to film school. I took a $350 workshop in New York City at Third World Newsreel, and I made cow tipping, which is the first thing I ever did, which is actually playing here. It's 1991. It's 9 minutes. It's kind of like wincing to think that it's playing, because it's like that old photograph. You're like, man, I really look like that or whatever. So, but that kind of fanned the first little flame, and made a couple more shorts. And then I was chosen for the Sundance Directors Lab in 1994. And so I made my movie 7 years later or something like that. So it took a long time still. So, but yeah, the second part of the question is how different is it, like, in terms of the technology? Like when I started, I edited cow tipping on video, like basically 2 VCRs. I cut Haircuts Heard in High, or my first 2 shorts on 6-plate moviolas. We shot film, we cut film, edge code numbers, work prints, that whole time. Then Doughboy, I wrote the script I didn't even own a computer. I wrote the script on a word processor, shot it on 35. Then I bought a computer, didn't have a FireWire, so I had to buy another one. So even nonlinear editing was a profound shift for me. And I became one of those crazy editors she's talking about. My day job has been as an editor. And then after Doughboy, I just started teaching on Resis, which is something I still do. That's certainly changed. There was a time when the technology was still like, there was a wow factor. I don't think that's here anymore. And it's because everyone, is making movies on their phone, and it's not the same wow factor. So I think that, and the technology changes all the time. Where with film, it was 24 frames a second through the gate, and the only kind of steady piece of it now, I feel, are lenses. They kind of stay. But everything else constantly changes. I recently did my first professional job on Avid. I finally had to leave Final Cut Pro, and I'm like, damn it, man, that's happened to me again. And now there's, it's just constantly, like, that just wasn't part of it before, where you had to constantly, expand your vocabulary of the technology. It's such it outpaces other pieces of it, which I think are more important, which is the storytelling. And for me, I feel like a storyteller, whether it's film or music or shooting the shit, whatever. Like, I want to write a short film called Boiled Wiener because of what she said. So your brain's constantly churning this stuff. That's just funny. So, like, your brain's constantly working that way, and like I get excited when I see a young person whose brain works that way, who's like looking at life, and there's usually really, like Chris said, artists, there's a sensitivity you have to the world, and but the technology is so different. From the Akatsuki Film Academy that Heather and I taught in California about 10 years ago, even from then to now, like, I had to re-educate myself if there was a chance that it was going to get funded again recently, and I was like, wow, I don't even know the cameras now. Like, it changes that quick. So you're always in film school, and the tech, somehow, like, renewing yourself in terms of the tools of the trade. And then I feel like, as a storyteller, I feel like I have something to offer after all these years, hopefully. Just that there's certain things I hold dear about structure and, voice and vocabulary, and, from whether it's screenwriting or, directing. And I guess sharing that with younger people is exciting, My story.
There's a book series that I co-edit on American Indian films and filmmaking, and Chris was interviewed for the one for Smoke Signals, our top-selling book in the series because it's so popular as a film. We also have one on our Tarnarjawat, and we have an interview with that filmmaker. You spoke a little bit in that interview with Joanna Hearn about it, but can you rehearse here? How'd you get started in it? I mean, what was your training? Did you think, I'm going to make films?
I had a pretty boring way into film, which is I went to school for it. I started out doing photography in high school, and through an Indian education program, one of my mentors gave me a 35 millimeter camera to take pictures with. And that really was the whole spark that made me go, wow, I want to make movies. So I did an associate's degree in television directing, and then I did a media arts degree, a bachelor's in film and theory, and then I did my master's at NYU in graduate film. And then I went through the Sundance Labs, which I still think are second to nothing else. I mean, Heather and Randy and, Shelley can explain it more, but I mean, there's nothing even close to that experience by way of workshops or labs, in my mind at least. And so Randy went in '94 through the labs, and I went in '95 through the Sundance Labs, and was one of the 8 directors chosen, and spent a whole month, directing 4 scenes up there at all the expense of the Institute, working with Alan Davio, DP, or Steve Zillion, I mean, just incredible filmmakers. Not to mention, Robert Redford, and to be mentored by these people for an entire month and work through scenes, there's nothing else comparable to it. It was a, I think Randy feels the same way. So Sundance was incredible experience, and I'm indebted to them, and I think all of us are, for, everything that Sundance has provided, and especially, the Native Initiative, which Heather was, instrumental in cultivating and making that all happen for a lot of people in the early 90s. I met this guy in like 94 or 93 in New York City. And I think we met on 2nd Street or something like that.
Around the clock. Right?
Yeah, around the clock, I think it was. And I met Heather, in the 90s, early 90s, and Shelley in the 90s sometime. So it's nice. I mean, there's a nice community of people. I mean, you talk about Phil Lucas and Sandy Osawa and Victor Masievsva, it was really,
And it's
fun.
ever more global too, which is what's so cool. Like in terms of, people coming from the Polynesian communities and the Samis in Northern Europe, and it just feels like it's just continuing. And folks from Central America and South America, it's really amazing how it's becoming so much more global. And even in the context of training and whatnot.
One really quick thing, because Chris made Tenacity, and around the same time I made Haircuts Heard, and back in that day, if you wanted to make a feature, whether you went to film school or not, you made a short film on 16 millimeter or 35 if you're lucky, and it's 9 or 10 minutes, and then you ran around with that short film and looked for $1 million. I mean, it was literally, and we found it. It was an insane notion. Yeah. And now I feel like the short films, a lot of this branded internet content, it's just, there's so much of it, and I feel like that's kind of taken a lot of that space.
Yeah,
maybe in a good way.
I didn't want to take up too much time with that little introduction because it's very academic to sort of take up the space. But I did feel, as a person who went through graduate school in the 90s, like we were at the time, oh my God, Native films are the future. The names that I were listing, these were films that were coming out then. As I was a student, I was thinking, God, the future is going to be awesome. There's going to be so many people making Native films, and they're going to be in the box offices on Friday night. We're going to go to openings, because that seemed to be where it was going, because it was this post Dances with Wolves phase. And I didn't mean to badmouth Sundance. I know Sundance is amazing. I talked to Sterling Harjo a little bit about the experience there. But maybe you would talk a little bit about that and shed a little light into the Sundance process. Do they give you a lot of leeway in terms of content and representation? Because the way I framed the question was sort of perhaps that Sundance is putting its stamp and now Native films look a certain way. But is that true?
For me, the lab, as Chris described it in the festival, they're really different animals. One is, I think the lab is still, this amazing place where you just you're in this sort of nest of perfect creativity with I mean, I had Arthur Penn helping me compose shots, and Robert Redford was in the editing room, and I had a script reading with Sally Field and Beverly D'Angelo. It's just insanity. And then, you make your scene with so much support, and you're just in this love bubble, and you're fed, and you're housed and massaged, and if necessary, libated, is that a word? And then they help you make these scenes, and then you have to sort of go before the very mostly loving firing squad, and they tell you what's wrong with it or what's right with it, and you have screenings in front. I remember it was just an incredible, it's such a gigantic part of my identity and just who I am as a filmmaker, and it's one of those things that I was depressed, it took me months to get over leaving there. Yeah, it was like it's like you want to just wake up and have a smorgasbord prepared and in the mountains and go make movies and think of nothing else. It's like a fantasy. And then the festival has changed so much. Over the years, it's definitely a commercial machine, and I don't know what all goes on. I've been in the festival and I've been not in the festival, and I think that there's enough Native content. The Native program, this used to be a sidebar, and they did away with that, and I think there was a lot of controversy, but from my perspective, I just felt like there was enough good movies that we should, kind of be competing in the, body of the festival, which I think has been proven with Sterling's work and Taika's, and, so it's been, the festival's changed with the times, but the directors' labs are just a steadfast, pure love bubble of filmmaking experience that anyone would be so, and the writers lab too, but anyone would be so lucky to be chosen to go through that.
You know, one of the things that I think about as a writer these days is that the democratization of technology has made it that there's all these blogs out here. Everyone's a writer now, and so writers as general get less money and less attention. And my best friend's a freelance photographer, and he says, you know, everyone's got a camera in their pocket. So I make no money now. I have to do 18 jobs in a week when I used to be able to go do one. I've never had an opportunity to sit with some filmmakers and ask about that exact same sort of lens, if we could look at that as a lens to look at something. The democratization has made it possible for Maori to make films and across Latin America and Chiapas to make films because the technology is sort of sifting down and changing. But what has been the effect on filmmaking and filmmakers who, this is your profession, this is what you guys have been doing?
I mean, Heather and I talked about that recently, which, you know, you're talking about, you know, Heather mentioned, you know, everybody thinks you should make a movie for free, basically. And I'm you know, in the union, I'm in the DGA and have been, and I remember when you used to get paid to make movies. And it's, you know, that democratization has made it, it's a great thing because everybody can make a movie. And then everybody's making a movie. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I used to get paid to do this, you know? Which is difficult now. So, I mean, Heather and I were talking about this. I was asking her, I'm like, so tell me, you know, what's going on, you know? I mean, we're always trying to find it, you know, trying to find...
I called you for a job.
Where's the handle? Yeah. I run a film school in Santa Fe now, Santa Fe University Film School. And it's going really well because everybody wants to make movies.
There was a question up there.
Oh.
Hi, my name is Chris Horak. I'm director of UCLA Film and Television Archive. And Chris and I met last night already, but Randy and Heather and Shelley and David. First I want to say I love all of your films, Doughboy and Trudell and Honey Moccasin and Kiss by Lightning, and of course Chris's films too. And I'm really proud that we were able to put this program together. So my question picks up on something you said, Randy, when you said how commercial, you know, film, the commercial phase of films is very, very short. And what we found in putting this series together was that the films themselves are very ephemeral. That because in Indian country, we're not dealing with one sovereignty, we're dealing with, I don't know how many, hundreds of sovereignties. There's no real institution there to make sure that cultural work gets saved and preserved. And that's an issue because, again, there were films we couldn't get access to because, you know, rights were either had expired, and therefore you couldn't get them that way, or they're just, the material's just not there anymore. Because most filmmakers are like you know, they're making these films with barely enough resources. And so the question is, for me, what are you doing to make sure that your own legacy in some way survives? Because there is not yet this infrastructure, you know, that makes that possible.
That's a really interesting question for me to right now because the Doughboy's out of print. I have 2 DVD copies. My mom has one. This print that I brought here is, I'm happy that it's, I don't know what condition it's in. I've been in my closet. I owe the negative storage like $2,000. I'm paying them off. So if I want to buy it I look for it whenever I see it on eBay.
Where is it stored?
It's called Bonded. And,
Is it Bonded?
Yeah, and I'm gonna get it out there and get it on HD. So, and that's my responsibility. It's at the Library of Congress. I mean, it's there. I mean, I'm gonna get it on HD cam and I'm gonna re-release it somehow, and I think and just make sure it's out there. But like I'll go on Amazon and it'll be $115 because there's like they aren't out there. And I'm like, this almost happened to Alex Rivera, a friend of mine with The Sleep Dealer, and he resurrected his movie from film death. It can happen, and that's not even his is only, that's not that old. So, I mean, it's kind of a scary thought, but in my case, that's a personal responsibility to make sure that I guess assumed it just would stay out there, and it takes, effort to keep it.
Shelley, as someone who works in multiple mediums, I mean, you have photography, you have the art, and then you have the film. And if you look at your website, which I'm glad you finally got I like your website these days. I couldn't find one 10 years ago when I was teaching your stuff. Is Canada looking out to archive your materials inside one location, or do you have to do that yourself, and where do you go?
Well, with Kiss by Lightning, you have to sign an agreement that you're going to send a copy to the library and archives, so they do have one. And then, of course, there's the company that distributes it, which is an artist-run center. And I don't know if they archive it, but it's something I really don't think about too much, And I'm getting old, and so to me, the important thing is keep working until you can't work anymore. And so, I don't know. I'm sort of leaving it up to society to say, yes, this is important. We must protect this piece or whatever. But for me right now, the most important thing is just keep trying to produce.
Just the question is so important because in the last time I think that we filled this theater was for the Exiles. And then your archive was responsible for redoing that film, which led to a reappreciation of it being put inside an art show just 2 months ago. One of my colleagues, Peter Nabokov, is writing a book for our book series on it. They're now going back to the archive, and we're learning all this new information about urban Indians, in Southern California, in Los Angeles in particular, because that film was held and kept and made safe for us to do that, 30, 40 years later. So the archival question is really important. Yes, we want you as artists to keep making art, but we also have to be proactive so that these things don't slip through. There was another hand that went up quickly. Yeah.
May I just say, UCLA Film and Television Archive will always accept material on deposit in which you have free control over, but you will know it was.
You guys have a copy of Trudeau. Thank you.
Yeah, very important.
And of course we showed last night our really gorgeous print of Smoke Signals.
Yeah. Right in the middle of the room. I'm gonna.
I actually just want to thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're here, actually, because what you did for the LA Rebellion filmmakers also was amazing. And I sort of reading your blog about that series. Reading your blog about. Mr. Hark, reading your blog about that series, I know that, that series and those filmmakers who went to this school, and some of them went through this program called the Ethno Communications Program, which was an affirmative action a program that students fought for to exist in the film school at this campus. And it was Black filmmakers, Native filmmakers. Sandy Osawa was one of those filmmakers, Asian American filmmakers, and Chicano filmmakers. And I guess, though, my more complicated question is wondering about, I'm so grateful for these kinds of series. I keep wondering about putting those films in conversation, though, to tell the story of Los Angeles and to tell the story of a multiracial America. I keep kind of wondering about the value of having the individual folk have their festival, and what would happen if we put those films in conversation. If any of you have any thoughts about that.
It's a great proposal. I wish someone would do it. And I think that you could, it's a great proposal, and I think someone should do it, because it would be really rich to compare something like The Exiles with Arlene Bowman's Talking Pictures, who was about being a student in a film school at UCLA trying to make money to go film her grandma who wanted nothing, or Anali, who wanted nothing to do with her. filming, but it was about the dislocation, and it made you think about relocation, and why were there even Indians here at this point, and where are all their films? And because they were making films, it's a great idea. You should be a film organizer for film shows. Awesome.
David, I was kind of wondering if this is a good opportunity to ask how the activity of filmmaking and tracking from whatever starting point, we're looking at about a 25-year history with the bulk of what we're showing, but whether the activity of filmmaking has underlined or fortified or elaborated or transformed the experience of pan-native community, both in the area that we're looking at and then maybe worldwide, because I'm aware of there being more interconnected festivals and activities and so forth. But also that there are distinct storytelling traditions and visual traditions and so forth, and now an opportunity for folks to exchange experiences and mentorship and inspiration and so forth, and what, in particular, the role of film making has had in elaborating the experience of pan-native social reality.
Great question. What's the ticket? Heather. Heather, you started. You intuitively reached for your microphone.
No, I put my mic up because I was going to say, Chris, you should answer this. But I want to make sure I understand the question. You're asking if the sort of couple of generations now of indigenous filmmakers, if that has if it has lended towards a kind of pan-Indianism within the filmmaking itself or within culture? I don't know, I understand that.
Probably more within culture, so to reverse the question out from film to other experience. But certainly also I'm interested in questions of film form.
I mean, I'll give you an example of it. I'm not one of the special invited guests. My film was ethnographic, and when I showed it at film festivals, it's about the yaqui. It's about an all-night ritual. We filmed for 4 days. The entire thing goes from the beginning of the ritual to the end of it. And I got a lot of heat for filming something religious because that's the one thing that no one seems to want filmed. I had a lot of Lakota and Miwok and people from around the country at these film festivals come up and say, thank you for showing something really important. And I did the sound by only giving everyone handheld tape recorders and having people who watched it in screeners record what they were thinking when they watched it. So I crowdsourced the narration, so a lot of it was inside their own language. And so people who weren't even understanding Yaqui were saying, we need more filmmakers, or we'd love to have filming our religious rituals. And I had to say, do you understand how taboo that is, what you just said? Like, yes, you might feel that. But what I was getting as one of the people who was privileged to jump around the country at the festivals was there's obviously interest there. There's people who were worried that we're not going to have that roundhouse dance, or we're not going to have the Bully Maru 15 years from now, whatever the case may be. I love the idea of doing the Well Hunt film. I hope that happens, Chris, because that's on the verge there of you don't, some of these communities, you don't have what we would call culture with a capital C without the religious ritual taking place, and that's dependent upon dreaming and hunting and things that don't get a lot of filmic attention because there's a lot of pushback against it. And I think that's pan-tribal. I'm sensing that's a sort of native context situation.
Well, I remember, I mean, Heather touched on this earlier, but we've been around long enough, all of us. I remember when it was really like, it wasn't considered indigenous film. It was like Native American or American Indian, and even within that, I remember there was this real focus on the plains, and everything was Lakota. It was just like this narrow, and it was like there was a time. It sounds weird now, but there was a time when it was like it had to be the plains. You know? Like you couldn't even be Hopi, or like it was so weird. And like I give a lot of credit to Bird, who's a globetrotter and turns over every rock looking for the next whoever. And Elizabeth Weatherford, I have to give it up to her because she was the first one that put like me and Bolivian, revolutionaries in a room together, and I've traveled. We've all traveled somewhere around the world with the Smithsonian or with Sundance, and so it really sort of started a conversation that was global, and you form relationships out of that. That was a profound shift. I mean, I remember when it was such a narrowly defined thing, and then remember the academics all racing to decide what native film was, and I like to think that like they kind of gave it a CSAT, like just they didn't let it, it's becoming something, but everyone was trying to say what it was, and I just think it was really always hard to say what it was once it became, certainly global, but it's just, there's so many different voices. One time at Sundance, the shorts, there was, I think, Trudell was there, Gilbert's film about sailing by the stars in Hawaii was there, Moccasin Flats, which was my movie about this rough and tumble part of Regina, Canada, Daga Lazar's animated sci-fi Mohawk film was there, something Cedar Shore. There was like just a dizzying array of movies. You could not one film resembled the other one. And then when we were in the Q&A, it was like, what defines a native film? And it was like, well, there's something spiritual, and it was us saying it. And I was like, we're doing it to ourselves. Sometimes it's important to believe your own eyes. So I always thought it was an elusive thing, and now that it's indigenous, I think it's an exciting conversation, and the work is going to continue to defy, like, whatever you guys call it.
We'll figure it out. Right, the academics.
Dave, we probably have time.
Middle, and then we'll come.
One more.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Oh, mine?
Yeah.
David.
David, you made a comment, you just made a comment that I'd like to get a little elaboration on. You said that there's, you sort of juxtapose the privacy of a particular ritual, people who practice that ritual feel that it's not something that they want exposed, with the, you oppose that with the idea of people being entertained, or people getting knowledge about the ritual, that the people doing the ritual feel that they have no right to get. And those you seem to come down on the side that says that you should trample on the rights of the people who are performing the ritual in the interest of society as a whole for finding out about the ritual, so it won't be lost in the ash bin of history or whatever. We have to make a record of it, even though the people don't want a record made of it. And I just wondered whether you really feel that.
Sure, it's more complex than I was able to cover in a sentence. The tribe I work with elders who are on the Mexican side of the U.S.-Mexico border, and I work with people who primarily speak the native language. And the tribal council, who wants to control all representations of the tribe, is north of the border. And so I have tribal council members who don't speak the language, who weren't even able to understand parts of the film, who did not like that the film was showing non-Christian aspects of their culture. So I myself found myself in the middle between elders who were not concerned about looking Catholic, fighting tribal council members who didn't speak the language, who want to make sure that they look really Catholic to outsiders. So I was going with the people who I'd had relationships with for 23 years, who made it possible for me to film the all-night ceremony of the death ritual of the person who I worked with for 23 years, who passed away. And his family is the only people who can say who has a right outside their house, in their household ritual. So after I made the film, I took the rough cut to some elders on both sides of the border, and I had their approval, and then I had them help with the narration, and they helped with all the subtitles and the translation. And in the end, I had the two religious leaders for the community actually ask the tribal council to get off my back, because they've decided that it's better that their kids are able to hear in their own language descriptions of their ritual than not to have it again, because that ritual was funded from the National Science Foundation. That's how I got the money to film it. Is the only time that it's ever been filmed. So if you look at it, you can actually get 3 pages of description of the rights and privileges that made it possible on my website. And you could, it's called Lutu Chuktiwa, L-U-T-U, Chuktiwa, or Cutting the Cord. You can Google cuttingthecord.com. We all have a website now. But and the very first page says, before you go any further, here's what you need to know about who can represent and who does represent the community. And if you want a tribal council approved representation, here's their website. And it's ethnographic, so it's not necessarily the same situations that you've all dealt with, but it's actually probably not that outrageously different either. We have been told that if we don't break now, we probably won't get a break before the screenings. And I do want to reiterate what was said by this gracious audience member. Thank you so much to the archive itself for making this series possible. As a person who's been working in the business for a while, this is an amazing event that you've pulled together with such luminaries. And so thank you to each of you. I won't name you individually, but thank you so much, and to the archive for getting it all done.
Can we sing Randy happy birthday?
I think we have to.
Does everybody want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Heather, are you going to lead?
Yes.
Here she goes.
Happy
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Randy. Happy birthday to you. That's so cool.
And my son
Thank you,
Ranger,
David. Thank you,
maybe
Shannon.
born today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, audience.